Thank you, Anna. And thank you everybody for being here today. My name is Catherine Lavender and I am the NACDA Data Project Manager. NACDA is the Aging Archive within ICPSR. Today we're going to be going over the National Institute on Aging perspective and guidance from Dr. Partha Bhattacharyya on data management plans, why data sharing matters, resources available from ICPSR and NACDA, and preparing data for sharing. And so I am going to switch control over to Partha so that he can click through the slides.
So let me just do my typical disclosure, and why my disclosure is important even now than much of the other times when we talk about data sharing. I'm a federal employee. I'm a representative of National Institute on Aging. I'm going to express my opinion during this talk, and these are my personal opinions, and they do not represent the opinion of federal government or my employer, that is National Institute on Aging and Health. Please keep this in mind. This is specifically important because at this point, NIH is going through, and issuing guidance on how data should be shared. And the context of that happens to be, there were a couple of notices issued and asking for feedback from public, how we should consider data sharing. That is in progress. That's why my disclosure is important, and I don't know how things will play out in the near future. So just keep that in mind. That's number one. Number two is I'm going to go over expectation from National Institute on Aging. And, some of the fine-grained tools is data sharing methods, how we share data, ensuring timeliness. The problem we have is we want data nowadays, but it takes a while to get data out, right? That's the problem. When does a study end? Or when does the data collection end, and when will the study end? Protection of human subjects, that's another core issue. And the problem there we have, as we have seen explosion of data, we're having harder time protecting human subjects identifiers. So what are some of the tools we at NIH have used is something I'll briefly touch on, but not go into greater detail. Understand proprietary data constraints. So for example, if you're using CMS data or other data and let's say you link that with a survey, can you really share it without getting permission from folks? That's something to consider. Provide complete data documentation. When one shares data, sometimes I've seen Excel sheets, and that's just Excel sheets. Is that adequate, for someone else to carry out the work, right? What are the skip patterns, for example, is never mentioned, right? So these are important considerations when one shares data. And lastly, considering requesting for funding for data sharing. This is a place where my heart has been there for a long time. I have been an employee for National Institute for Aging since 2013. I have been involved in issuing at least 2 or 3 RFAs where we sought out, archiving. So consider that as an option, although we do not have those announcements out, right? If you send me an email and say we would like to archive data, the option is I will say, come on in. And usually the way it works is I will introduce you to, Dr. McNally. That's usually the first introduction you get, because we would like aging data to be archived as much as possible with NACDA, because we support NACDA. Next slide. Great. So data sharing policy, again, I'm going to zoom through this because this is a changing landscape. Right now, the highlight of this is much of what we had been talking about is circa 2003, 2006, and it was applicable for all grants. Mostly, researchers were asked to share data for grants over $500,000. Grants under $500,000 didn't have to actually explain. That landscape may change in the near future. Please keep in mind I'm using the word may because I do not know what will happen in the future. Next slide. You can look up NIH data sharing facts. And again, I anticipate these FAQs to change in the very near term. And it has already changed for National Institute on Aging, that as I will talk about, how things have changed on our end. Next slide. So at NIH, we have a blog, and with these blogs, we issue some of our policies. And recently we issued guidance on data sharing. And I'll give you the highlight of the guidance, not go over each and every single element, so that you get a brief idea on the expectation. And then, individually, it varies by grant. That's the caveat that I always like to say, because just because you're collecting all data, it doesn't mean you can share everything, right? So you can get that information from our blog post, and the blog post in question is, it's called NIA Guidance on Sharing and Other Data Resources. Although NIH policy states, you have to share data or when it comes to over $500,000 in direct costs, we at National Institute on at Aging, we are encouraging data sharing even below at $500,000. That's one of the key changes that has happened over the course of last year. And again, I just want you to keep in mind the landscape is changing. NIH policy will soon change, right? The other key component of this is investigators, should consider a repository. That's an important part of where to archive the data. So for most of my grantees, I actually ask them, where will you archive it? Will it be Dataverse or will it be NACDA? If they're paying for data, if NIA is going to pay for data collection, I would like to see it archived somewhere. So that's what we are asking. Investigators should describe and justify, the timetable. We hit on that before. And then restrictions on sharing. This is very key to any data sharing policy. As you write your, human subjects protection plan or data sharing, you should keep this in mind and adjust accordingly, right? So if you're saying, I'm going to use, HRS data linked with CMS claims data, for example, HRS is Health and Retirement Study linked with CMS claims data, you actually cannot make that whole package available, even though you're a researcher. Because number one, CMS policy actually prohibits you from sharing the CMS portion of the data. And HRS policy says, you're using just the public use file and you need their permission to use the data. So just keep that in mind. Lastly, again, touching on a few things, human subjects involvement has increased and the type of data we are collecting has increased in a rapid rate, especially with sensors. We should be mindful of that, and protecting privacy of our respondents is of great importance of National Institute on Aging. So please keep that in mind. Then lastly, again, as you write data sharing plans, one thing to keep in mind, you should describe how to curate data and other resource documentation, right? Including metadata and a format it will be made available. FAIR is a principle we have suggested, and I think many of you are familiar with it. It's basically finding accessible, interoperable, and reusable data principles. And if you go to the blog, you can read more about it, but I'm going to try to wrap up now and get at some of the finer, what I'll call discussing points that people may want to get at later. Consent forms. When you consent for data, consider if you can get broad consent beyond your group, right? That way others can get utility out of that data, not just your group. Protecting privacy, we hit on that. And again, I have to emphasize on that again and again. Protecting privacy of respondents is of paramount interest to NIH. And I cannot understate that, and I'll repeat that across the board. Longitudinal studies, how do you prepare longitudinal files? Wave over waves, are they presented in cross-sectional way, or are they presented in a formatted way so that other analysts can actually take advantage of it, right? Cost of making data available and other resources available for making such data. Please keep in mind, I already said, I'm more than happy to hear about if you're planning to archive some data or make it user-friendly. Contact me. I will try to facilitate that. I am in a position to facilitate that. What I cannot guarantee you is a grant outcome. I can tell you which grant to apply to and how, but outcome is not guaranteed. Common data elements and combining data. As you combine data from multiple sources or multiple surveys, or even same survey, common data elements will be key. And we are harping on that, not just today. This is becoming a theme, because if you're trying to pool data across multiple studies, you can get great insight, even from smaller studies. So common data can play a great role, right? Lastly, review process, and this is an NIH process, and I'm going to hit on this. If you're planning to apply for a grant, I know I am looking at, my colleagues are looking at data sharing plans at this point, and this will become far more important when NIH releases its data sharing plan and implements it. This is NIA's plan, which I think in many ways captures what may come. I'm using the word may again, may come from NIH in the very near future, but this is something for you to keep an eye on. Once NIH comes out with the data sharing policy, you're going to find out more, and we'll be sure to at least share it with this group because we can make that available. So I think now it's my turn to turn it over to Dr. McNally.
Thank you, Partha. And just so everybody knows, we will answer all of the questions at the end, but you can definitely type them into the chat box. And as we move through them, Anna will help us answer anything that's about logistics. And I am going to move to the next slide and let Dr. James McNally, the director of NACDA, take over.
First, I want to thank Dr. Bhattacharyya for joining us on this. The NIA perspective is essential to understanding these problems, and Partha is not only a passionate proponent of data sharing, but he has ideas. He thinks about this a lot. So he is an excellent resource at NIA to contact when you have questions about data sharing and ways to improve your NIA data. I'm going to just talk briefly about why sharing data is so important. Next slide. We've been at this for quite a while. NACDA, as a repository of aging data, has been funded by NIA for almost 40 years now. And our job is to encourage the sharing of data by researchers and to facilitate the use of these data by other researchers. We are a tool that all researchers can use, both to meet their responsibility to share data and to use the data that is shared responsibly and in a manner that facilitates the education and learning process. Behavioral and social science research, what we typically call BSR, was probably one of the early advocates of data sharing. We have a culture of data sharing that goes back to tape and card reading technology. Similarly, ICPSR was one of the first repositories to provide access to secondary data. Again, originally through tape and paper sharing, but also as technology changed to improve the process and made it simpler. We began with political science data. A group of researchers at the Institute for Social Research decided that our understanding of political processes, elections, and human behavior towards the election of official is benefited from broader sharing of information among multidisciplinary researchers. And from that, it's grown to aging, criminal justice, demography, a variety of topics. We've expanded from political science to broad behavioral and social science research, and we're increasingly incorporating biomedical research into our repositories and building tools to facilitate that kind of transition. Similarly, the US government has been historically open about treating data as a public good. This is particularly true for health data, such as the National Health Interview Survey, the census, a variety of studies that the federal government sponsors and provides. In other countries, this kind of openness to data sharing by the federal government is less common. In some countries, it's virtually impossible to get census or administrative data from the federal government. In other countries, you have to purchase it. So the US system is particularly open to multidisciplinary research, to encouraging researchers to use data for secondary analysis. Over the past 20 years, since I've been affiliated with ICPSR and NACDA, I've seen tremendous changes in the philosophy of data sharing, and increasingly non-BSR disciplines such as biomedical, epidemiology, and psychology are more freely sharing their data as they understand the benefits and the contribution they can make to the science in general. All of this data sharing has enhanced our understanding in a multidisciplinary framework. Next slide. There are clear benefits to data sharing. First and foremost, it fulfills your obligation to your funding agency. Increasingly, NIH, NSF, private organizations, institutions, and foundations have an expectation that you will share your data, that they're not paying you to collect a personal data resource you can use exclusively for your purposes, but you are creating a public good that will be shared more broadly with qualified researchers. This is because it promotes team science, a term that's coming up more and more in our disciplines, where a multidisciplinary approach brings in different perspectives, different scientific approaches, different research frameworks, and tries to meld them into a bigger picture that help us understand health issues, political issues, and a wide array of important topics. Team science generates new perspectives. It brings in a different view. If you're a demographer, if you're a sociologist, if you're an economist, you have your specific disciplinary approach to looking at data. Working multidisciplinary with biomedical researchers, with psychologists, with epidemiologists, with public health officials, they bring in a different framework, and it may open your eyes, as it does quite frequently for me, to different ways of looking at the data and to obtain new and more exciting results. From a practical perspective, sharing your data increases its use. Primary investigators can do legitimate research, they understand their data, they can do wonderful work, but they're limited in what they can produce. They cannot produce hundreds of studies a year using their data. This is why we see widely shared data such as the HRS, now reporting over 6,000 publications using its data. The MIDAS study has almost 1,300 publications using its data, and NCHAP has almost 2,000 publications using its data. This would be impossible if they did not freely share the data and encourage the secondary analysis of these studies. And that body of literature has a tremendous impact on the way we do research, because we have all these different disciplines and researchers looking at the same data from different perspectives, finding new findings, validating existing findings, and refining the way we want to look at data in the future. Data sharing also builds collaboration. It allows you to actively work with people in different disciplines, different universities, different countries, using the same data and coming up with new research findings, new information, and new publications. This is all to the better. And this kind of multidisciplinary team science makes you as an individual a better researcher. It broadens your world and makes you think more broadly about how data can be used in an effective research framework. Next slide. One of the primary benefits of depositing data within a formal repository such as ICPSR or NACDA is that we have the tools to standardize the presentation of the data. So if you download one NACDA data set, the next time you download a NACDA data set on a different topic, you'll have a good idea of what to expect in terms of the code books, in terms of the data formatting, in terms of the support services, and the information about the studies. NACDA, like ICPSR, attempts to provide a standardized format so you can begin research faster. You don't have to write special codes. You can download a SAS or SPSS or STATA or R data set and get right to work. It also makes your data discoverable. We use, like many organizations now, DOIs, data object identifiers. These are unique IDs for specific files, topics, subjects, publications, etc. Data that's deposited with NACDA or ICPSR is assigned a unique DOI, and that makes it easier to find this data elsewhere. For example, if you take the SWAN study DOI and put it into Google, it'll immediately take you to the study and let you click from there. If you put it into Google Scholar, it'll pull up publications that have used and cited that study. It's a good way for a researcher to see where data is and what it's been used for. It's a good tool for the primary investigators to see how their data is being used and what publications are coming out of their data. And this has an impact on refunding and review process after a study is completed. And it's also a tool for project officers and funding officials to get a feel for how frequently a data set is used. So this is a nice centralized tool that allows researchers, primary investigators, and funders to see very quickly how discoverable a data set is. The more discoverable it is, the more likely it is to be used in secondary analysis. Next slide. So this is the big question. Why have a data sharing plan that simplifies the use of your data? Why do you want to go to the trouble of planning out your data sharing, your data management plan in a way that would facilitate its use? Properly designed data sharing plan has significant impacts. Not can have, but does have significant impacts on the use and scientific impact of your study. Next slide. This is a recent, how do I put this? This is a recent set of studies that were promoted in an NIA blog. The Lifestyle Interventions and Independence for Elder study. It's an excellent study. It's got lots of very useful information, but its life was largely that of a clinical trial with rather severe access rules, requirements, paperwork to fill out. And while justified to some degree, it also presented barriers to use. And what we can see from this is that the life of the study so far has created 93 publications. This is reasonable. This is efficient use of the data, but In all likelihood, most of the publications relate one way or another to the primary investigators or their collaborating partners. It doesn't have the broad use we'd like to see, and it doesn't have the kind of broader use that NIA is currently promoting. Next slide. In contrast to this, we have the study of women's health across the nation. Both of these studies are discoverable at NIA through their aging resource section. SWAN was originally restricted, but in discussions with the collaborating partners at SWAN, we were able to get permission to distribute it through NACDA as a public use study with required registration. So to use SWAN, you need to register with NACDA and provide identifying information so we know who you are, but we don't place unnecessary barriers on use. It's slightly different. It's an epidemiological study compared to a clinical study, but nonetheless, same time period, roughly, they've got 448 publications, largely driven by the fact that any responsible, qualified researcher can download this data and use it for publications. This is right in line with what we see for HRS, for MIDAS, for NSHAP, for a number of freely shared studies. You don't get it anonymously, you get it with registration so we can track use and provide information. If we change the data, we can update you. If you have problems, you can contact us. This open data sharing also creates opportunities for communication with the repository. We are always interested and excited to hear from our research community. If they're having problems with the data set, if they have ideas how to make it better, if they found any barriers or had success. If you publish something using NACDA data, let us know. We want to promote it. We want to tell the world about your work, and we'll put it in our online bibliography. Nothing makes us happier than to get an email from a researcher telling us they just published a paper using data they downloaded from us. This is science. This is team science. This is the purpose of sharing data. Next slide. There are always concerns. I read through the 400 or 500 pages of comments on the new NIH data sharing plan. And while many people were in favor, there were a series of common concerns. And probably the most important one is that of how do you protect respondent confidentiality? And this is largely a misunderstanding of how data sharing works. We don't want to expose any respondent to disclosure, and we take extensive measures to avoid that. If you deposit data at NACDA or ICPSR, it is thoroughly reviewed. We will do everything in our power to make sure that it's safe to share responsibly. Data does not require disclosure. We increasingly support the use of multifunctional data sets. If it has highly disclosive information, that should be managed under a restricted use agreement. But that doesn't mean the entire data set has to be under a restricted use agreement. There are always elements, useful elements of a study that can be released for secondary analysis through registration, which is very straightforward and simple. We can work with people to define these parameters and to help them make their data as accessible and useful as humanly possible. And that just improves your presentation when you go for a recompeting or a renewal of a study or a new study. You can show that your data has been extensively used by others and that no bad issues have emerged from that use. It supports both the value of data sharing and the quality of your research data. All data can be shared safely if appropriate safeguards are put in place. This is what we do. We help people define and design safe ways to share data. Confidentiality is not an excuse for not sharing data. I can't emphasize this enough. You are only hurting yourself if you restrict access to a data set that can be shared freely. You won't get the publications, you won't get the use, and you won't get the scientific collaboration that is so essential to successful research in this environment. Next slide. Finally, we'll help. This is part of our job. As a U24 that is explicitly funded to support NIA data resources and NIA data researchers, we want to help you. We have decades of experience in creating and developing data management plans to address best practices in data sharing. We manage a wide variety of data sets. We're focused on longitudinal and repeat measure, but we do not in any way discourage the creation, use, and distribution of data of different types. We can help for a variety of data structures. We offer data management plans for public distribution, and we also have data management plans up to and including a physical enclave. These are discussions that PIs can have with NACDA and ICPSR research staff about the needs of their study. We don't want you to over-restrict a study, but we certainly don't want to not take into serious considerations particular disclosure risks that may exist. We can work with that. That is not a problem for us. We can help you navigate the development of a successful data sharing plan because we work constantly to update and improve the best practices for data sharing as a repository. This is our job. This is our research mission. NACDA can help you develop a data management plan if you're writing a grant to NIA. Even if you choose to distribute the study yourself, we can offer advice on how to facilitate distribution and how to ensure that it's used more extensively by the research community. We are always happy to discuss adding to our repository, but what is more important is that you feel comfortable sharing your data with the research community and building these collaborative relationships across disciplines and science. We want to help you be successful and productive. I can't emphasize that enough. Our job is to help you be a better researcher and to be more successful at what you would like to do with our data. With that, the project manager, Catherine Lavender, will walk you through some of the tools and services that NACDA and ICPSR offer to achieve these goals. And thank you very much for your participation in the webinar today. Catherine?
Thanks, Jim. Okay, so I wanted to highlight some data management plan resources from ICPSR. As I mentioned in the beginning, NACDA is the aging archive within ICPSR. And ICPSR, if you haven't heard of us, the Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Science Research, this is what the homepage looks like and how you would get to the data management plan information from the homepage is you would, go over to the right-hand side of the page and go to that data management and curation tab and click on overview. And if you click on overview, it leads you to a page that has a lot of great resources, tips for preparing data for archiving. You can see under the access icon subtitle, there's data management plans hyperlink, as well as some information about confidentiality. So if you were to go to the site, you'd also find that ICPSR has their own webinar on data management plans, which was recorded recently, and I encourage you to go there and check that out. We also have some FAQs on data management plans, so if after this you go to the site and you have some questions that we didn't get to answer, go to this page and you will probably find the answer to your question because there's a pretty thorough list there. Okay, and then I wanted to highlight ICPSR's Guide to Social Science Data Preparation and Archiving. This is a great resource if you are new to data sharing and you're not sure where to start. You can check this out and get a digital copy, and at any point, reach out to ICPSR user support or to NACDA user support for help. And let's see, from there, I'm going to talk a little bit about NACDA. So the National Archive of Computerized Data on Aging, I usually just call us the Aging Archive because it's shorter. Within ICPSR, we're on campus at the University of Michigan, but right now we're all working remotely. We are supported by the National Institute on Aging and the National Institutes of Health, and we preserve and share data on aging. And we've been doing this for years, as Jim said, and I like to highlight that back in the 90s, there were, under 30 public use data sets. And now we have, just within NACDA, over 13,000 data sets. Okay, so ICPSR won the National Medal for Museum and Library Science last year, so we're really proud of that, and we're proud to be part of the data sharing community for about 40 years. And as far as how those thousands of data sets translates to studies, we have about 1,600 studies available on our site, and we're always looking to add more. Okay, so data management plan resources. One thing when you think of your data management plan is a letter of support. As Jim mentioned, we are happy to provide those. And our email is icpsr-nacda@umich.edu. Please do reach out to us. When you start to think about your data management plans, we can provide feedback, we can provide the letter of support, and we can help you with some of those data sharing methods that Jim and Partha mentioned. And I also want to say really quick, I noticed a couple questions that came in, but I'm going to wait till the end to answer those. So thank you for your patience with that. And getting back to the slides, just when you're getting to that place where you know you want to share your data and you're considering doing it with us, depositing with NACDA and with ICPSR helps fulfill your grant obligations and broaden the research potential. It's free for you to deposit and for secondary users to access. The long-term preservation, I think it's drastically undervalued. We have like 6 copies of all of our data throughout different places. And so long-term, if anything happens, we make sure that we're able to access that data later on. And another reason you might want to deposit your data with us is that it's easy to track usage. You can just go to your study page and see how many downloads there's been, and you can see how many related publications we found and link to that study. So when you're preparing data for sharing, some of the key takeaways that I'm going to talk a little bit about as we go through the next few slides, but just these main points. You want to remediate the risk of respondent confidentiality concerns. And so like when Jim and Partha were talking about protecting respondents, we definitely help you do that. You can reach out to us and ask questions. But before you submit any data anywhere, to your own site, to another site, to us, the main things you want to make sure are not in your data are names, addresses, phone numbers, any direct identifiers. We don't want those in the data. There might be some exceptions that affect the utility of data for some kinds of identifiers, but overall, these types of direct identifiers should not be in your data. You want to provide complete collection metadata, which is your sampling information, your study design, and just anything that a data user might need to know about how you collected that data. You want to provide complete variable metadata. This means creating variable and value labels. And it also means making sure that you have consistent variable naming. And something Partha mentioned, common data elements. You can look up common data elements, but basically what this means is that many researchers have collected data and created questionnaires. And so you can draw from existing resources that other researchers have already created, and that would allow more comparisons and wider use across studies collected by different people if they have those same elements. So your question asked in the same way in the same time frame, and given a similar kind of variable and a variable label and range of values. Okay, and then you want to provide documentation. So we do want a code book, we want your questionnaires, we want your user guides, we even want your syntax if you're willing to share it. Anything that will make it easier for someone to replicate the analysis. After we share this recording and the slides, you can watch this funny and kind of painful video that I like to share with new staff that kind of hits on the core of what we do. And I'm not going to give any spoilers. I think you should just check it out after. Okay, one of the popular questions we get when people deposit data with us is how long does it take? And to that question, I have a few questions in return. How many files do you have? How many variables are there? Are there labels included in the data file? Do you have a release date in mind? These are just a few of the questions off the top of my head that I am going to ask if you deposit data with us. And this, you know, helping me to answer these questions about your collection will help us determine the best way to release the data in the time frame that works best for everybody. So reach out to us. How long it might take depends on a lot of things. You know, if I were going to try to be funny, I would say there are a lot of variables, but anyway, moving on. Preparing data for sharing. Is your data longitudinal? I think that if you're going to deposit longitudinal data, you should give special consideration to what you're going to share and how you're going to share it. So you want to highlight variables that should be used to merge the data files. And again, I would encourage you to share any syntax and consider providing that merged file. We want to eliminate any barriers users have to performing analysis on these data. Okay, and so let's say you've thought about all of the things that we just talked about, the variable names, and common data elements, and you know, your study design and everything, and you're ready to come to our site and check out how what resources we have to help. So if you go to our homepage, you can go to this data resources tab and you can click on the data tools and resources, and it will lead you to a little bit more information with examples of some longitudinal data that we house. Also, when you're thinking about depositing with us, please do email us and we'll walk you through the deposit process, and that'll just make, you know, the trial and error go a lot more smooth. And oh, I forgot to say in this last picture, this is me and Jim, just to put some faces with some names. All right, and so if you're on our homepage, you can click on the deposit data tab, and it will lead you to a couple different resources. We have a depositor checklist. So if you're wondering about all the details that I shared and you want to make sure you have everything complete, this depositor checklist will help you make sure you have everything you need to complete your deposit. And then also, when you click on our deposit page, you'll notice that we have two ways to deposit. The first is with the Aging Archive, our curated archive. And this is the NIA funded archive. And the main difference is who does the curation work. With the NIA funded curated Aging Archive, we do that curation work for you. And we make the studies discoverable and convert all materials. And then the other way is with our new open aging repository. And this allows users to have the self-publishing control of their data. So it would still be discoverable through us, and it would still be grouped with other aging data resources. It's just that you would create, with our guidance, you would create the study page and upload the materials. So I want to highlight an example of what it would look like when you submit your data to the curated archive. A very popular study is displayed on the screen right now, MIDAS 1. And the Midlife in the United States study, it's one of our most downloaded collections at ICPSR. And if you go to the study page, what we do is we create everything you see here, everything that the user needs to know in order to download the data before they're going to download it. And we create this with information provided by the depositor. So you can see that there's a lot of information in the summary. If you scroll through, we have subject terms that are we use to tag the studies. There's information about the versioning as well as methodology. And that's where that sample information and whatnot comes in. And MIDAS is a longitudinal study, and so there are many data sets that can be linked together. So this information is really important to give to users. And then we have some scope information and some data collection notes that we think users will need to look at. And then that last piece on the study page is the analysis information. And this is especially for weights. So as you can see, we try to cover everything. And if you go back up, you'll notice that the study pages have different tabs. So data and documentation, that tab is where you would go to download individual data sets. And you can see that the downloads and the data related publications are right there to the right. And also what I just clicked on there is a link to the MIDAS series. So this is a convenient way to show if you have a lot of data sets, how they're linked together, and they're linked together through a series. MIDAS has 25 studies within their series, and they're listed on this page. Okay, so if you deposit with the NACDA OAR, it's part of the open ICPSR repository. And some reasons you might consider depositing, self-publishing, is that you can control the content and the versions. It's a pretty quick turnaround time to get that DOI. It's discoverable through ICPSR and NACDA. It fulfills your data sharing requirements, and we track the use of your data still. And then here's an example of a NACDA OAR study page. So as you can see, the data files are listed right there. The depositor for this set this up, and we help that person with the naming. And if you were to scroll down on this page, you would see all of the same methodology information as it is on our curated study pages. So just a quick recap. And there's a couple things that I left out about the difference between NACDA and NACDA OAR. We publish and prioritize NIA-funded research in the NACDA curated archive. It takes some time to curate and convert the files, as Jim mentioned, to the SPSS, SAS, R, and Stata, and everything else. And then we perform that confidentiality review and would, work with you about anything we thought were concerns. And we create that page content and those final versions based on the information. We manage the versioning over time. We, do have that long-term preservation user support and the bibliography team to add related publications. And then as opposed to the OAR, it's self-published content on data on aging. There's a quick turnaround, as I mentioned, for the DOI. You would perform the confidentiality review and create that content. Oops, sorry about that. And then you control the versioning. Okay, so wrapping up, we have a newsletter if you want to stay informed. And if you go to our page, you can see that there's a subscribe to news feature there. And we send out a quarterly newsletter. If you want to stay informed in other ways, we have all the social media that we can handle, except Instagram. So find us on Twitter and Facebook. And again, you can always email us. And at this point, I will read any questions that come in, and please feel free to submit new ones. Okay, so the first question is, are there samples of data management plans available? I do think that there are samples available on the ICPSR website. So you should go and check those out. And I also think that on the NIH guidelines site that they provide examples of statements for your data sharing, to put in your data management plan. And then another question says, is there a timeline known to NIA for when new NIH data management and sharing policy will be released and implemented? And maybe Partha or Jim can speak to this question.
I don't know for sure. Partha, was indicating in his introductory remarks that this is an ongoing process. When they come out with a final statement, we will definitely make it available on the NACDA webpage as part of our analysis, and also through social media. That's all I could really say about that. It will come.
Yeah, it's imminent, I will say. We just got public feedback within the last few months. So I think I can say, if I had the magic ball, I would say over the next 6 months and buy some insurance, but it's never a guarantee. So I hope in the very near future.
Thank you, Partha. We got another question. It says, the examples you gave were of observational research. Do you also take clinical trial data? And yes, we do have a mix of data, actually. I know that it's becoming more and more popular that studies are mixing the observational data and survey data and clinical trial data. One thing we're limited with is if there's any kind of physical samples to store. For instance, SWAN, the study of women's health across the nation study that Jim mentioned, that is observational and survey data, but they also have some, I think some blood samples in a repository, and that's not with us.
Yeah, we're very open and welcoming to sharing clinical data. We can share it safely, and we encourage clinical data researchers to contact us. We've been working with the Cochrane Collaborative as well on developing protocols that allow the safe sharing of clinical data. So if you know anyone, we would love to have that conversation.
Thank you, Jim. And thank you, everybody, for these questions. It's been so wonderful to talk with you today. And it looks like somebody from the audience shared a sample of a data management plan from ICPSR. There's a hyperlink in the chat box. So everybody should be able to see that. And earlier when Partha was talking about the NIA site, there was a link that we shared that you should check out as well. And we will share this recording and the slides as soon as we can. We do a check for ADA compliance and whatnot, and make sure that it has captions. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us. And yeah, I think if no one else has any questions, we will call it a day. Thanks so much, everybody, for being here.
Thank you so much for attending, and feel free to contact us at any time. Send us an email, give us a phone call. We'll set up a web chat with you if that's helpful to your work. Thank you so much.
And thank you to Partha for taking some time to provide the perspective from NIA today. All right. Take care, everybody.